What's up, guys? This is Lewis, and I'm your co-host. You've tuned in to Counterculture Podcast. Hope this inspires you and gives you perspective about your purpose. With your support, it gives us the opportunity to become more visible in the podcast section and all the streaming apps. So if you can, make sure to leave us a 5-star review.
What is up, guys? This is Anthony. We want to welcome you to our 17th episode. Definitely amazing to see that we've been able to constantly produce content at this rate that we've been. We want to thank you just for being with us now for almost a year. This is our first year doing this podcast, and we've talked about an array of different things. And so it's exciting to see just everything that we've done, all the reviews, all the texts, all the emails, just everything that you guys have said to us, the feedback, support. We love it, and I ask that you guys will just continue to support what we're doing, because we know that this is the first year and we are only going to get better. And last week we really focused in on the importance of focusing in on the now, focusing in on daily moments, every moment that you find yourself in. And I think that it's very important to really present an idea, really important to focalize something, whether it's a new concept or a new foundational teaching. But as many people would know, whether it's a professor, as a coach, someone who's trying to lead or guide a group or an individual, what they'll find is that they can have the recipe, they could even have the best fundamental practices, but without an alignment with the value and action, there's no way that you're going to get the production that you're seeking. And so I'm brought back to this American businessman. His name's Stephen Covey, and he writes in his book, The 7 Habits of a Highly Effective People. He writes that we achieve inner peace when our schedule is aligned with our values. And so the reason that I quoted him was just because I felt that it's interesting that we present so many different concepts, so many different ideas, but the reality is that if we aren't planning on applying our values to our schedule, then we're really just planning to live an unbalanced life, because I can have all of these values, but if I'm not willing to implement these values, these priorities into my schedule, then I'm just going to live a double-minded life, a very unbalanced life. I'm going to know an idea that I'd love to execute in my life, but I just never get around to it. I'm definitely not a self-help kind of teacher. I'm not this self-help guru that sits around and loves to meditate all day and just loves to find different ways to better yourself. I just don't really know where I stand on that. I definitely believe in growth, but I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a self-help kind of podcaster or teacher. But I do believe in this idea of spiritual formation, because we are all a soul. Whether we like it or not, we are a soul. And I think Jesus in the Bible, he definitely exemplified one of the core values to finding an inner and exterior peace when he practiced his idea called silence and solitude. You'd find this so many times that Jesus would be walking, he'd be praying, he'd be healing people, he'd be doing ministry, and you'll see it. I don't know how many times, but you'll see it just all throughout the scripture, specifically in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. What you'll see is that Jesus was constantly just withdrawing. You'll see him preaching, and then he withdraws. You see him with a group, he withdraws. And so the Bible, it's just constantly showing us this withdrawal that Jesus loves to do right in the middle of his time teaching, right in the middle of his time being with people. He just always knows that there's this specific time of his life that he needs to practice silence and solitude. And so I think that one of the biggest obstacles we live in our modern, tech advanced lifestyles, is that there's this focus on social media. There's a focus on what's happening. For whatever reason, there's this huge momentum building toward just touching our phones for whatever reason. I think it's funny how a lot of times I'll even notice that myself, I'll walk to the printer at my job, or I'll walk to the restroom or so, And for whatever reason, I feel like that's in time for me to just pull up my phone, even if I'm just checking my calendar, when in reality, I already know what's on the to-do list, or I already know who texted me last. Like, it's this addiction we have. And funny enough, studies do show that smartphone users, they touch their phones on an average of 2,600 times a day. And it's insane because this number actually jumps to 5,400 times a day when they studied just millennial iPhone users. And so just think about that for a minute. That's 2,600 times a day that someone is touching their phone just for the general smartphone user. And that number is just skyrocketed into 5,400 when it's narrowed down to the study of millennial iPhone users. And so the point is we're touching our phones. I mean, come on, let's just break it down for a minute. 5,400, like I'm not going to do the math right now, but I'm almost guaranteed that that's taking away about 3 hours of your workday. So realistically, a lot of us complain that we're overworked when in reality, we're probably only working 5 hours instead of an 8-hour shift, right? And so, yeah, we're definitely one of the most distracted generations in history. I would definitely say that this is one of the biggest obstacles that we face with this idea of trying to live out what Jesus exemplified as being silence and solitude. And it actually makes it very complicated. Definitely looking to you, Lewis. I think that you being a person who definitely is more of the tech guru on our end of the spectrum with most of the digital design, most of the RSS feeds, and just everything that you completely just create on our end of the spectrum with this podcast, having years of experience with working with the tech industry. What would you say is something that you're finding the tech industry kind of creating like a spiral or downside effect on people? Do you feel like there's something that the tech industry is really distorting in people? Do you feel like there's a downfall to tech? What do you feel?
He's right. I handle what you see on social media and our website. Anyway, he produces about 80% of the content on our episodes, which you guys listen to. The reason I say that is because we are both using some form of technology to get the message across to you guys. But to answer your question, man, is there a spiral effect to technology? The simple answer is yes. Here are a few reasons why I feel there is one. One, it's created, I guess, a less empathetic generation for the simple fact that social media has created some sort of narcissistic personality disorder in us. Help me, be there for me, listens to me. Sure, we need these things to remain mentally healthy, but sometimes we forget that other people need us too. Did you know we are called to serve, not be served? Those are Jesus' words, not mine. Don't at me. Also, we've become more impatient. Here's why and how. Because think of it this way. Technology has given us the ability to see things now, get things now, and buy things now. Sure, you have to wait for it, but you don't have to wait in a long line or crowded plazas. How often do you go to the store and say to yourself, I'm so glad to be in the store with long lines and crying babies? Little to none, right? I'm sure we could all resonate with this next point that I got for you guys. You know how when you're in a store and you see someone either not cool with or you just don't want to say hi to, what do? You grab your technical device, aka your phone. You act like you're either texting someone or you're on the phone. No, just me? Awkward. Basically, it's given us this unhealthy response when it comes to any form of social settings or communication. Lastly, of course, our favorite, social media. This goes for all of us, including myself, because I'm a flawed human just like the rest of the world. What social media has done to this generation is give us this feeling of instant gratification and even sometimes instant validation. We instantly think if we don't get these likes, we aren't good enough. How often do you see people post? How do you think they feel if people don't? Now, validation is a big one because we automatically assume that because we say it, it's validated. When in reality, your thoughts that you express to the public should be thoughts that you express with God, because through His grace, you're always validated. Like we said in the past episodes, social media can steer us into comparing our lives with others, and when we compare our lives with other people through the spectrum of social media, we in time get jealous, mad, frustrated. All in all, I feel like it's led us into depression, shortening our IQ, lowering our attention span, and even disconnecting us from God.
What's definitely absolutely wild about this idea of lowering our attention spans and IQs is that you can't really have a true relationship with God. And without a relationship with God, there is no spiritual formation. There is no true formation that's going to be taking place without that connection. And so it's absolutely complicated to allow these devices and all these distractions to come into place, because this is exactly what Jesus was doing. There was opportunities out there. There was opportunities to teach, opportunities to get famous, opportunities to grow. He had so many opportunities. I mean, I couldn't just look all throughout the prestigious people that he was able to come into contact with. I couldn't imagine someone more busy than Jesus. Like, he was just constantly on the go. He would start the day early and almost always end the day late. And what I found is that Jesus was definitely busy, but here's the thing is that you're never too busy to live a life of silence and solitude. If anything, if you are busy or in a busy time of your life, that makes this all more important to you, because there is a sense of, everyone has this iPhone or smartphone now. And if you're like me, sometimes you forget to plug in your phone, right? And this just happened to me recently. And I forgot to charge my phone, and I ended up waking up the next day, and I'm just constantly what the heck, I get on the road hoping I have my car charger. Turns out I don't have my car charger. I'm running on 5%, all throughout my drive to work, freaked out. Is my phone going to die? I'm not going to have access to maps. I'm not going to have access to calling 911 if I get into a car accident. And I'm just freaking out. And then once I get to work, I'm absolutely going just bonkers looking for a charge. I'm just going up to people. Hey, do you have your charger? I don't have my iPhone charger. I left it at home. Do you have a charger? And it's almost like every single moment of my day was consumed with the idea of trying to get a charge for this device that really means nothing. Sure, maybe it adds aspects and layers to my life and some security blanket, but ultimately I spent my entire focus of probably the first 3 hours of my day just trying to get 5% extra charge, 10% charge. And I just think that that's it's a real story that happened, but ultimately I like to think of it as our life. I mean, a lot of us that we're busy and we're constantly on the go, you'll get to a place where you're going to wake up one day and you're going to realize, wow, I absolutely am depleted. My mental health is destroyed. My health, physical health, I am destroyed physically. And you're going to realize I need a charge. Maybe that's why you're even listening to this podcast, is because you need a charge, which is great. But here's the difference is that I am not God. Your pastor on Sunday, he's not God. Your self-help teacher, they aren't God. And so Jesus, he did not just turn to other rabbis to receive a charge, but instead he was constantly connected to the Father, in which was ultimately able to reproduce life into his own soul. And this is vital because we live in a culture where there is so much noise going on. There's noise of social media, there's noise of culture, noise of comparison. And all of these noises, what they're doing to us is it's only making us deaf to the voice of God. I was recently reading actually it was a speech, and you can look it up. It's a speech of Dr. Martin Luther King. It's the speech from 1964 whenever he won his Nobel Peace Prize. And I loved it because he was talking about the idea of technology and just how America at the time was progressing with just so many of the things that they were creating. And so this is Martin Luther King here. He says, "We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the sea like fish, but we have not learned the simple art of living together as brothers." He goes on to say, our problem today is that we have allowed the internal to become lost in the external. We have allowed the means by which we live to outdistance the ends for which we live. I think this is phenomenal. I think it's amazing that way ahead of his time, definitely as a leader, someone who is just speaking end, to this reality that we've completely made this idea of allowing the means by which we live to outdistance the ends of which we live. I mean, just think about that for a minute. Do you really need to check Instagram every 5 minutes? There's nothing changed. I challenge some friends of mine recently dealing with some of the Instagram and Twitter issues. I told them, I said, I challenge you, check Instagram once a day. Check it at the end of the day, right before you go to bed. And let me guarantee you one thing. This is what I told them. I said, you'll miss absolutely nothing if you were to check it at the end of the day in comparison to checking it every 5 minutes throughout the day. The only difference is that you'll be losing time because you'll just be refreshing your feed in hopes of a new post, in hopes of a new like, in hopes of a new comment, when in reality, all of those same likes, those same comments, and those same posts would be there at the end of the day, right? But all of these things, what they're doing is they're disconnecting us from our reality.
So Anthony, we both mentioned things that disconnect us from our reality. But what are a couple things that can connect us back to our reality? And most importantly, God, whether it's something you do or something you just recommend.
That's the whole focus of this episode, actually, is that we're trying to promote this idea that we can find purpose through unplugging. Unplugging through cell phones or whatever it has to be. We're not anti-technology, by the way. But here's the thing is that Jesus, like I said, he is constantly resembling this life of disconnecting, withdrawing, and finding what the Greek term uses as eremos. He's finding that solitary place in order to gain insight from the Father. And so whatever that looks like for you, it just brings me to terrible shame. And when I remember the first time that I was introduced to this idea and concept of silence and solitude was actually back when I was in college. And my professor, she was our spiritual formation professor, and she was actually teaching us this idea of silence and solitude and some of the disciplines of the faith. And as a final report, what she had us do was she said, you need to spend 24 hours at a desolate place. And she had some places that she had in mind. There was like a desert. There was a Catholic church that you can go to in LA. It's just a desolate spot. You literally stay there for 24 hours. You pray every 3 hours, like this really hard task, right? And then at the end of the day, you write a 6-page paper on what it was like to live a life of silence and solitude. And actually, for me personally, I actually was opposed to going to the beach. I hate the beach. That's not me. I know you're probably like, what? But yeah, so I'm not a fan of the beach. Definitely not going to go to the desert. And so what I did was I tried to go as extreme as possible. So I locked myself in a room. And I just had Bethel playing for 24 hours and a actual physical Bible and just read scripture all day, prayed, and just meditated on how hungry I was because I was fasting. And it was just a miserable, like probably one of the most miserable days of my life. I mean, I wrote it in my paper how much this silence and solitude practice was just didn't work for me. And if anything, it made me even more anxious. And I'll never forget what my professor told me. She said, the problem is that the way that I thought that silence and solitude was meant to be was just by disconnecting and being an extremist, right? But the problem is that that's not how real life works. I thought that through isolation that I'll find freedom. But the reality is that through isolation, I was constantly buying into lies, just things that I would deal with in that moment. Just being faced with the reality, just being able to overthink life. I was stressing myself out in that day. And like I said, I remember it was just one of the most tormenting experiences. And so I just want to make that clear. Silence and solitude is not supposed to be isolation, which leads to being enslaved to these lies that you could tell yourself. But instead, it's actually to find freedom. It's to find an inner peace that leads to an exterior peace. And so it doesn't have to look the same for everybody. Maybe for me, right now, a place of silence and solitude that I'm finding very unique are long drives. Long drives are a great way to just focus. I mean, sometimes I'm not even listening to music. Sometimes I just want to drive and I want to think and I just want to look at the sky. I want to look at the mountains. I want to look at the grass. I just want to look at things. I want to look at the tall buildings in downtown LA. I look at all the architecture and I'm just amazed. I'm amazed at what God can empower humans to do. It's simply amazing. If you work with your hands all day, try and disconnect from using your hands all day and try to connect with using your mind. So maybe go read a book. Maybe go have a conversation. Maybe go sit down with a mentor. Now on the flip side, if you're someone like me who works all day using their brain, dealing with people, maybe go do an exercise that requires you to have some physicality. Maybe go on a run, go to the gym, start a new CrossFit group. These things, all of them, they can all be aspects of silence and solitude. It's because it's not the fact that we're locking ourselves into a room, blasting Bethel music for 24 hours until we're sobbing on the floor. Sure, that can work for most, maybe some, but not for all. The key is to disconnect from your reality, your norm, in order to connect to what God is truly trying to tell you. So like I said, a simple way to put it is this. If you work with your hands all day, try and disconnect during your time of silence and solitude from using your hands and try and connect to your mind. Maybe read a book, read the Bible, listen to a podcast, go hang out with a mentor. Those are all great ways to find silence and solitude. It's almost just like a simple reverse activity. And so just keep that in mind throughout anything that you guys are planning on doing. We're also open to providing you with other practical ways. So don't feel afraid to email us, as we'll simply just get back to you, just something that might work for you. I'm reminded of a theologian and German pastor martyr. His name's Dietrich Bonhoeffer, amazing author. He quotes saying this: "Therefore, we must seek out the recreating stillness of solitude if we want to be with others meaningfully. We must seek the fellowship and accountability of others if we want to be alone safely. We must cultivate both if we are to live in obedience." I read this quote just to make sure that you understand that there's a balance between solitude and community. They need to coexist. They're not counterintuitive. And so what I mean by that is that a lot of people might hear talk like this and say, okay, great, thank you. This is all I needed to know. I'm leaving the church. I'm, withdrawing from my community group, whatever happens, right? This happens all the time. But the problem is, if you're in a healthy line of solitude and a healthy line of community, you actually find that you're going to find yourself on great footing as you're building your foundation on obedience, as you're seeking out the true practices of Jesus.
Let me add to that point real quick, Anthony, because I think it's essential to our mental health, emotional health, and most importantly, our spiritual health. So, find that silent place, find that place of solitude, as you've been talking about. Where it benefits those three components to our health is when we approach this idea of silence and solitude with the right attitude and the right intentions. Because the more you find that space with God, the more familiar His voice sounds in your life. And when you hear things that sound more familiar to you, you're more likely to respond to it. Such as when you're out and your children starts crying, you respond to it because their cry sounds familiar to you. It's the same with God. When you hear Him and you know it's Him, we are able to respond to Him because we've been intentionally spending that time with Him. Like Anthony said earlier, Jesus, He pulls Himself out of situations in order to clear His mind so He can fill Himself up with the Spirit of God.
Absolutely, man. I think that it's essential for us to implement the same practice. We're never too busy for that. But ultimately, silence, what it does is it initiates us to be in a position of trust. I mean, just think, last episode, we kind of talked about this and how we love to talk, we love to speak, we love to talk about our opinion, but we hate to listen. And this is exactly the same situation that we put ourselves in when we practice silence and solitude. You're forced to listen more than speak. You're forced to be in a position where you're allowing God to speak into your situation. You're allowing God to put his own opinion and knowledge into that. What does his word say? And it's hard for us. It's hard to bear the silence, right? Because it makes us feel helpless. And so what I want to say is that when we're silent, you're putting yourself in a position not for someone to just gain control, but for God to take control. You're putting a position for God to say, you know what, I'm going to take control of this. You don't even have to say anything. I'm going to rejuvenate you. I'm going to refresh you. I'm going to remind you. I'm going to give you a new vision. I'm going to give you a new way to do life. And that's the whole purpose of silence and solitude. It's so that we can refresh. It's so that we can rejuvenate. And it's so that way we can ultimately do life better. Without that time to take a pause and recharge, we're just going to be living life on empty.
All in all, to wrap it up, when your car is running on E, what do? You fill it up. Take care of yourself and learn how to recognize when your gas light comes on. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of today's episode, guys. If you can, make sure you subscribe to whatever platform you're listening on and leave us a 5-star review. Don't forget to turn on those post notifications and share this episode with your friends and family. We appreciate all the support. For more content like blogs, social media feeds, and even resources, just visit our website at counterculturepodcast.com.